Hello everyone, in today's video I thought I'd share a couple different tips to learning how to fly these tricky things called helicopters. There's really a lot to flying a helicopter, and now those of you who are the absolute most veteran of veteran instrument pilots out there, you'd actually be surprised to see that flying a helicopter isn't that much different. For those of you who are kind of new and you really love the idea of flying a helicopter, well, there's a lot of different things we can take a look at to try to make your experience a little bit better. Let's get started. The first part, and I think this is a really important bit, is your controls matter. I really, really mean that in so many different ways. In a real helicopter, you got this lovely little control stick that's conveniently between your legs. You've got the two little pedals on the floor. You got this little stick here. For those of you who are familiar with Microsoft Flight Simulator, which I hope you are, which I imagine you are, you probably know that Microsoft applies curves to the motion that you actually control here. So you'll notice if I deflect my control all the way to the left, so if I move it nice and slowly, nice and slowly, nice and slowly, I'm at the halfway point of deflection, by the way. Watch what happens. Do you see how we have this massive jump of sensitivity when we get to the extremes? But as we're in the middle, do you see we have not a lot of sensitivity? This is because Microsoft Flight Simulator applies control curves to all the controls. Now you'll notice in pitch, it's basically 1-to-1. But you're going to notice in roll that you get this bizarre, really, really long region. Again, I'm moving my controller not very far, but look what happens when you get on the edge and you try to hang on to it force-wise versus when you're in the middle. You can see it actually dampens it. So if I actually give my controller a really hard wiggle here, you can see it's not moving much. When I give it a little wiggle over here, look at how much control deflection I'm getting here. That's one of the first things that really throws people off when they're flying helicopters, is because they're not flying with a linear position. Now, if you were to press the escape key and go up to your controls options and you go up to your sensitivity, yeah, I got a lot of things plugged in. Oh, well. Oh, by the way, that's my joystick, in case you're curious. If we go to sensitivity, you're going to notice all of my sensitivity curves are completely straight lines, with the exception of a tiny bit of dead zone in the middle. That dead zone works pretty well for me. The reason this is really, really critical is because it allows me to have a more direct control of my helicopter. Now, what some people do is they say, well, can you adjust the sensitivity of this in order to make it so it's more sensitive in the middle? Yeah, you technically can. As a matter of fact, if I were to come over here and crank it like this, I'm actually going to increase the sensitivity 50% on the x-axis. Now, let me go ahead and do that in both directions. Please don't do that. I'm going to increase by 50%. So now what I've done is I've actually increased the response that you see in the middle. So if I actually were to go this way, that would be negative response. That would make it very annoying in the left direction and very easy in the right direction versus a piece. Now, if I press the done key and I go ahead and press apply and save, I'm going to hate myself for this, but I'm going to do it anyway to show you what happens. If I take my controller now and I move it a little bit, you'll notice I have an almost perfect linear response until I get to here. But notice, even this part of the stick, I'm now moving it almost 1-to-1 with the real world versus where the actual stick in the helicopter is moving. Now, when I push it forward and backwards, it's already 1-to-1, but this left-right is significantly better. Now, you're probably saying, well, I'm so used to flying it with the regular curve. That's great. If you want to fly it with a regular curve, there's nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, one of the tips that I usually recommend, and I got to set this back, I'm used to it one way. I'm just giving you a tip for those folks at home who are looking to make this a little easier for you. One of the things that a lot of people will actually do is they'll reduce the sensitivity overall on the axis. What they can do is you can actually reduce the reactivity, which is actually going to change how quickly some of these different items react to it. Now, generally, I prefer high reactivity, because if I slow this down and I wiggle my hand a little bit, it's going to go down. So, of course, you have the extremity dead zone, and you can actually flatten the curve. So now if I go down to, let's say, 50% flat, that means that I'm losing 50% of my total sensitivity in this control axis. The reason this is so useful is because it allows you to really, really, really go easy on the controls, or even be a little rough on them, especially if you have a really short joystick. My joystick has got a very long extension on it. I mean, total length here from the base of my joystick to where my hand rests on it is about 12 inches. So that's a pretty substantial difference between that and like a little, 1600, or was it Thrustmaster, I believe is the one. So because of that, taking the time to really go in here and fitzing with this is going to make a huge difference in how reactive those curves are. And I can't emphasize that enough, of taking your time. There's a preset manager, by the way, that makes it easier. So now notice, now that I've returned it, I get this little hee, but in trading it for having that less sensitivity in the middle, which makes it easier to hover. Our next thing we're going to take a look at is the limitations of the helicopter. Now, a lot of people are like, wait, what? Well, that doesn't really matter that much. Believe it or not, we have limitations in a helicopter. And flying the helicopter within those limitations and forcing yourself to do so is actually going to not only make things more authentic, number one, but they're also going to be in a situation where you're going to have a little bit easier time of it. We can see here right now I'm at 27% power. You can see I have a warning zone. Of course, I have the trusted red line. Don't cross this line kind of a thing like that. But there's other items we have here. We have a carburetor temperature, for example, and you can see our helicopter is right in the dead zone as far as carburetor heat goes. So I'm actually going to flick on the carburetor heat, and you can see the carburetor heat's going to come on. Of course, when you do that, you're going to get a reduction in power, but because of the FADEC on this helicopter, it'll actually catch up and catch on to that, which actually works really nice. We also have things like cylinder head temperature, which you can see I'm about to exceed the max. We're not moving, so of course we're not getting any cooling. Oil temperature, oil pressure, fuel pressure, and of course we have our usual things like how much fuel we're carrying, and as well as our RPM. Now on a helicopter, there's 2 different RPMs you have to actually worry for. Now some people, of course, would probably say you have 3 RPMs, which you're not wrong. That's our engine RPM, plus our tail rotor RPM, plus our actual main rotor RPM. Now you'll notice that when I'm in the dead arc of the green here, that's going to be fine. But if I apply some load on the rotor, you're going to watch the RPM of this go down until the governor catches it. So if I cut my collective, did you see that little power right there? Now it's going to have to restabilize. Now if I crank the collective, you're going to, whoa, of course we're going to go airborne here. You'll see that massive drop of RPM. That fluctuation of RPM has a huge impact on how difficult this helicopter is going to be to fly. So it's one of those things that you want to be very, very mindful of. The next thing we're going to take a look at, and I notice I haven't even gotten in the air yet, is the weather. When you're planning flights with a helicopter for the first time, you can stack the deck as far as making it easy for you to fly. There's a couple of really, really common values. One, of course, is going to be temperature. The lower the temperature, the more sensitive the helicopter is going to be, and it's going to be a little bit easier to fly. At high temperatures, especially if you have a piston-powered helicopter, that could be very, very challenging to fly because you can easily exceed your limits. The other thing, of course, is going to be wind. And by wind, I'm really talking about turbulence, not wind itself. The wind itself is actually very, very helpful. Like, for example, you notice we're on runway 31 here. If I were to take this and crank this sucker over to about 310 and give myself a little tiny wind, that's actually going to make my flight simpler. Of course, if you're going to do that, make sure you do that in the gust direction as well. Otherwise, you've just made your flight harder. So again, keep those kind of things in mind. I like that. That's perfectly good. Speed, 5 knots. I'm good with all that. So always have weather that makes sense. Some people like to fly at night. For those of you getting real-world helicopter training, flying at night is very, very useful. All right, let's get this thing rolling. I think I've talked enough today. So the first thing that I really warn people, and this is going to take people a long time to get the hang of, is you've got to be a little extra gentle than you're used to. One thing you'll notice is I'm very, 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 very slowly applying the collective here. Now, pros can jam on that collective and go. But for us, what we're looking for is the moment the helicopter starts to get light. Now, in the real world, it's very distinctive when it starts to get light. You can feel the whole helicopter comes up about half an inch or so, and then you can feel it. But for us in the sim, we've got to use some kind of external factors. Now, unfortunately for us, we don't get that little word of warning there. So instead, we're relying on using quite a bit of our own knowledge as well as kind of catching it right as it starts to catch up. There's about the 50% point there. I'm just going to tip the cyclic forward just a little bit and make sure I'm applying enough right foot. And you can see that was not enough right foot, but you can see it gets us up in the air. And off we go. Nice. Do a little pirouette here. And we'll go nice, do a little gentle shift and line ourselves up with the 3-1. So the next thing that you're going to learn, and now this is probably one of the strongest tips I can say for people learning helicopter other than practice, you've all heard that one before, I'm sure, is you have to mind the little changes. What makes the best quick learners of helicopter pilots are the ones who can see things happening and react instantly with just enough response in order to make it operate properly. Now, if you take a look down the end of the runway here, I'll intentionally let myself drift. Just look at the relationship between the dashboard and the end of the runway and what's going on here. See how it's starting to come up and then it starts to go down? But now notice, slightest change is all it takes to completely stabilize the helicopter. See how it wants to drift right? I've already compensated for it. And that's what's going to give you those really, really good hovers, is learning it. See how it's starting to twist to the right? It's all about finding the teeny tiniest little adjustments and instantly giving you exactly enough control to compensate it out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and give ourselves a little bit of power here. We'll do our classic little regular takeoff here, nothing special. Man, these controls are damped. I'm perfectly fine with that, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go cruising up here, and there we are. We're nice and airborne. Now this is going to bring us to the next thing, and this is really critical. Is a helicopter, remember you have multiple controls working together. We have the anti-torque pedals down there on the floor, we have the cyclic in my hand, and then we have the collective over here on my left hand. Whenever you make a single change to any of them, the other two are affected. Now, that's one of those things where people are like, wait, is that really the case? Absolutely. As you probably noticed when we were getting this thing all ready for takeoff, when I applied collective, the helicopter had a very strong tendency to turn in the opposite direction of the rotor. Now, the other thing you'll notice is that now that we're kind of cruising forward, holding up relatively steady here, we're not level or anything like that, but it's more than enough for us. You'll notice that I'm not moving any controls, with the exception of releasing just a little bit of pressure as we start to pick up. Now, let's say I were to pull back on the cyclic a little bit. Now, watch what happens. The nose is going to come up, and you're going to see the helicopter start gently twisting to the left because the weather vane effect has come out. Now, notice if I don't apply any more, I've not changed my foot position, it's going to start twisting as it starts slowing down. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Let's say I go ahead and push my right foot forward. Now, as soon as I do that, I've canceled out one effect, but you also notice now, because I've got so much of that going in here, I am now holding the helicopter at kind of an oblique angle, and we're also gaining altitude. Now, if you remember that giant rotor that we have up on the roof, if you want to imagine it, if you watch this thing in slow motion, you could actually watch the helicopter blade cut into the air and actually raise and then fall as it completes its circulation around the helicopter, depending on the position of the cyclic that I have in my hand here. So when I pull this up, I'm actually going to create lift without having actually touched the collective control at all. So you can see as soon as I bang that sucker in here, we got lift, even though I didn't touch the collective. Now, some people say, well, wait a minute. Let's see you got yourself all nice and squared away here. I'm actually going to get myself going a little tiny bit here. I need a little bit of translational lift to make this work. There we go. Let's at least get out of the yellow arc here. There we go. Now we're moving a little bit. Not too bad. Our little silly string is being all slippy. By the way the slip string works is the direction that the string is facing is the opposite direction you need to push the pedal. So if I push the pedal to the right, see how it deflects right? If I push it to the left, it's going to deflect left. The goal there, whenever you're working on the slip string, is you're always trying to keep it in the middle if you can help it. But remember, it's opposite. It's not like the ball. If we step on the ball here, you'll see it actually recenters. All right, so now we've got ourselves a little tiny bit of speed here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it going. What do we got here? Got about 60 knots? That's plenty. I'm going to go ahead and just apply some collective without touching the other two controls. Now notice the nose pitches up, and notice also that the helicopter is twisting to the left. Now let me go ahead and cancel out that collective I just applied. Now notice the nose twists back towards the right. It's really hard to resist not auto-correcting it. You notice the nose twisted back to the right, and you'll also notice that my nose actually pitched down. When you're doing that, you're adding to the total lift of the rotor blade, not just the one that you're applying when you're actually applying the cyclic. So one of the things that you'll need to start to learn is how to coordinate all those motions together. Now, me as a regular fixed-wing pilot really struggle with turns because I'm desperately trying to push my right foot forward here. But if I were to push my right foot forward, all that's going to do is going to make me go a little bit straighter. But if I do like pilot right foot forward, you're going to see that it gave me too much string. All right, you can see a little left foot makes the string go left. That's the easiest way to remember it. So what we're going to do is that we're going to come bring ourselves back around here. Now that my power warning is at 5 because my cylinder head temperature has gotten so golly darn high. You'll notice actually my little power line has slowly made its way to 90%. I can't even go that much power because we're so close to a critical cylinder head temperature. That's what happens when you sit on the ground instead of flying. These things want to fly. So let's go ahead and now bring ourselves into harbor here. Now, one of the things I learned when I was taking my helicopter lesson ages ago was the fact that when you hover, it's all relative. Now, let's go ahead and slow down nice and gently here. Now, notice, I'm not going to touch any controls. Watch what the helicopter's doing. I'm not pushing anything. I'm not adjusting anything. I'm just holding the controls neutral. Notice we're twisting left, and also notice we're starting to slowly spiral towards the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cancel out one of those forces by pressing the right foot, and I'm going to cancel out the other force by increasing my collective. Now, as I'm increasing collective, I'm pushing my right foot forward. You can't really see that very clearly, but I am. So one of the things that I usually learn that works really well is whenever you pull the collective down, release pressure on the standard pedal. In this case, it's right. In this particular one, it's left on other helicopters. So if I increase collective, automatically push your right foot forward. Just do them together when you're applying those forces. You'll notice as I've done that, we just leveled off. I didn't even see the nose of the helicopter shift in the slightest. Now, when it comes to modifications of angle, remember that when I'm at an angle, let's go ahead and get ourselves a little bit of angle here. Left string. There we go. Let's get myself going. Remember that not all of my lift now is going upwards. Us fixed-wing pilots have a real simple solution for that. What we do is we pull back on the stick a little bit. But because we're a helicopter, we can actually hold a level turn just by applying a little bit of collective, which also, coincidentally, will help cancel out a little bit of that silly string nonsense. Now, the problem, of course, is you got to remember, if I put a force in, that means when I come out of a turn, let's go ahead and come out of our turn here, I now have to cancel that collective, which means I need to release a little bit of right foot at the same instance. And you can see I did that all in one coordinated move there, which kept us going very, very smooth. So remember, any change on one control requires a change on the other controls together. One thing I usually tell people when you're first getting the hang of helicopters, the collective control, I hate to say it, if you just treat it like a wing, you're fine. You set the wing to what you want it to, and then use the rest of the controls to basically control where you're going to. And then our last tip, and I think this is a very, very valuable tip here. Of course, I'm stomping on the right pedal. There's my pilot's instincts there, fixed wing. One thing I really, really have to say too is you have to pace yourself. I've been flying helicopters for a few years. I've got very, very good controls to fly these things, which makes it much, 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 much simpler. And what you'll find is as you start to kind of working on it, you're going to get obsessed. I got to get this. I got to get this. And you're going to end up spending, 45 minutes obsessing over trying to get yourself the absolute world's most perfect hover. It's not going to do you any good because it's just going to stress you out. And then you're going to start practicing the wrong things. So when it comes to trying to fly one of these, it's all about finding that nice balance between getting a little bit of practice in, getting your victory, and then pausing and then giving it a rest. So hopefully these tips encourage you to fly helicopters. I think they're amazing. In VR, they are such a trip. I can't emphasize this enough, though. You've got to take your time learning how to fly one of these. It's not like Tom Cruise at the end of Mission Impossible Fallout here. You can whip that all around that you like. I feel sorry for that helicopter, that movie, by the way. But remember that it's all about that smooth ride. It's all about being in control. Because as we're going to see next time, we're going to be taking a helicopter in a way that you probably don't usually associate helicopters. Enjoy.